Now we're going to talk about the ball movement inside of our Pong game. So at this point, we've created all of the sprites. We have the basic view and show, and we can move the paddles up and down. All of our buttons start the game off, and we have all of our stages. And if you have not made it this far, make sure you go back and watch the other videos so that this will actually work the way it's intended. One of the last things we want to do is make this ball move. And that is simple as long as you think through the problem in a very easy way by breaking it down to simple steps instead of trying to overwhelm yourself. So, in our example, we want the ball to move, but we actually want it to sort of pause and start before it starts moving to prepare our players for what's going to happen so they can be ready to play the game. Because we're wanting to do it that way, we're actually going to use an event called when this backdrop switches. And when we switch to our play screen, we want the ball to go ahead and start moving. The first thing we want to do is actually hide the ball. And then we want it to go to the very middle of the screen by saying go to X0 and Y0. And then we want it to point in a direction. Now I'm having it point in a direction because I don't want the ball to just go left and then right and just sort of like be boring as it goes back and forth. I also don't want the ball to go up and down and not be able to be reachable by the paddles. So we wanted to point it in a direction towards one of the players. And if I click on this and I can drag my cursor around, you can see that I can go to the upper left-hand corner is -45, bottom left-hand corner is -140, or if I go to the other side, +45 is the upper right-hand corner, and the bottom is a +135. So I want this thing to point towards, or point in direction, some number in between those numbers. In this case, I want it to go somewhere between 45-ish and 135-ish. So I'm going to have an operator of pick random between 45 and 135. Sweet. Then I want it to wait a little bit of time to get our players ready, and then show. All this does is set the game ball up ready to go. Doesn't actually move anywhere. It's just setting it ready to go, pointed in some random direction that'll start our game off. Now we want it to bounce. So we're going to say control over here and a forever loop. And a forever loop that moves the ball using our move block and our variable of ball speed. This is what enables the different difficulty levels of slow speed for easy, a sort of a medium speed for normal, and then a fast speed for more difficult. There's also a cool, if you'll notice if we play on this, the ball now moves. Great. Of course, it hits the edge and then it just continues to go. So there is a nice, cool block called if on edge bounce, that when we have that selected, it'll actually detect the edge and then bounce off. Looking pretty good, okay? That is how the ball moves. Now, we also want the ball to be able to score a point for the player if it reaches one side, and score the point for another player if it reaches the other. In our case, we can do that using the control block and if. If, and we're going to use, let's talk about the left side for first. If the X position of my ball, the X position is less than something. So if I were to drag this over and bring it past the paddle near that wall, I can see my X position is around -231. So I'm going to go ahead and say, well, if my X position is less than 230-ish or so, then we want to change the player 1 score, or the player 2 score in this case, because it's the second player that's made it past player 1. Opposite, we can duplicate this, and we can say instead of less than, we want to say greater than. greater than, if my X position is greater than 230, because if I drag this over to the opposite side, around 230 is when it gets close to hitting that wall. And so I want my player 1 to be able to score a point at that moment. Now, when I play this, you can see the ball moves, it hits the end, and a person scores a point. But the game dictates that once someone scores a point, the ball should return to the middle, wait a little bit, and then restart. Now, this is my restart code. All this right here was the code that I used to restart. I could duplicate this and go ahead and add them into these different sections, but that's kind of clunky, and it's showing the same code over and over again, and it doesn't keep it very well organized. What we can do, though, is keep our code organized using a custom block. So here is my blocks. These are reddish, pinkish colored blocks, and they allow you to create your own block. If I click on this and say ball reset, I can now take a ball reset and define it as these blocks. When I do that, I now have a new block here in the left that will execute all of those blocks for me that are listed underneath here, so that I don't have to duplicate my code over and over again. I can place one here, and I can place one here. This is in coding world defined as a method or as a function. Those terms are used interchangeably. It allows us to repeat code as many times as we need without having to rewrite it. If I change anything in here, it will affect everything that it is connected to. Let's see how that works. Player 1, easy. You can see that it waited 2 seconds before it went. It touched the edge, it reset, picked another random direction, and continued this code anytime that that block was used. That's pretty awesome. So now we have scores working. The only thing we now need are paddles. So in our events, we also want to detect if our ball touches a paddle. So let's zoom into this a little bit here. If, under sensing, we are touching a paddle, let's say player 1. If I'm touching player 1, which is my player here on the left-hand side, if I'm touching this thing, I want it to bounce off towards the right-hand side, either in the upper right-hand corner or the upper left-hand corner. Again, in our directions, we can see that the upper left-hand corner is about 45 and the bottom right-hand corner is 135. And I see people not quite get this directly, so I want to make sure we emphasize that. Go ahead and go to your motion, and we're going to point in a direction. Again, we're going to use our pick random operator in something between 45 and 135. Let's duplicate that, drop it below. Let's say we're going to touch player 2, and we're going to do the opposite. So these are going to be negative 45 and negative 135. Okay. Now, let's see how this works. I can move up and down. It bounces off the paddle, bounces off the other paddle, and the game plays. That's the basics of this game. As long as we score enough points, which hopefully we do, should get above 10, then we go to our game end, and that's how the game works. That is your very basics. Another thing we want to note is that as we play this game, and our player 2 scores above 10, we switch to our other screen. But you can see that this event is still being triggered, and the ball is appearing and sort of continuing to play. We don't really want that to happen. We want that ball to stop. One of the ways we can fix this is by going up to our initial if backdrop show and hide script. In this case, what we can do is add this block called stop. And we don't want to stop this script. We want to stop other scripts in this sprite. So that means if we are in our play screen, we will show. Otherwise, we're going to hide it and stop any of these other continuing scripts. That way we can stop having this ball from randomly appearing and showing in our game. If we stop and try this again, player 1, go to easy. We're going to go ahead and drop our player 2 score up. These guys are no longer being triggered, and we are having a clean, nice completion to our game.